Joining us now, as he does every Monday, our NHL insider from the Bob McCown podcast, the former executive producer, Hockey Night in Canada, Mr. John Shannon with Sekeres and Price. How you doing, John?
Happy Monday, boys.
Happy Monday to you, sir. Want to take you to Thursday and your show with Nick Kypreos, which shook up Canuck Nation here. A little bit. First of all, I think a lot of Canucks fans are wondering, like, where is that coming from? That's pretty hard stuff when we talk about a broken team and a country club room and all of that. Where does that come from, and why such a harsh assessment?
Well, first of all, the harshest, and I'm not pushing the blame, but those were Nick's words more than anybody else's. I'm not sure where Nick got it, but Nick's tied in. Nick's got good contacts around the league in so many ways still, and they have kind of returned to him now that he's back on the radio in Toronto. I think that there's a lot of common sense behind what we've talked about, what the core is and who the core is, and defining the core, and then what Jim and Patrik want to do. And Nick just took it to a little bit more dramatic phrasing than we've talked about. The Canucks did not make the playoffs as well as they played. They still did not. And I truly believe that Jim and Patrik came to Vancouver with a plan in place, and all they're doing is executing the plan, and nothing has changed. It's not as if there was anything dramatic that happened late in the season, or after the season ended, or after Bruce agreed to come back. This is Jim Rutherford putting his plan in place, and I think we're going to have to wait until the 7th and 8th of July to really get a feel for that.
You used the word broken. What's broken about them, best you can tell?
Well, I think it goes back to what Nick described as the country club, and how Vancouver's a great hockey market, and the Canuck players are in that realm of being put on a pedestal. And I think that really what Nick was talking about was accountability along the way for what was going to happen and what has to happen to become a champion. Jim Rutherford did not come to Vancouver not to be champion. And that's what he's going to try to build. It's funny, the stories of what went on with the Canucks, even during COVID, even while Travis was the coach, how lax the COVID rules were enforced in Vancouver compared to other places. And you wonder if there's a residual effect of that in this last little discussion. But quite frankly, to me, I think Rutherford and Allvin are saying we are going to do it this way. We don't care what anybody says. We have no loyalty to previous regimes, and we are going to reinvent the Vancouver Canucks.
And that's the thing. There's a lot of contracts signed from even just last summer from the previous regime that, boy, if you could get those off the books immediately, you'd probably want to do so. I forget which one of you said the 6-month span. So a lot of people, I think, maybe sort of saw a couple of your quotes and thought, wow, it's going to be a busy summer. One of you had mentioned in the next 6 months, which of course takes you into next season quite a bit. So, you can't build Rome in a day. That's not to say that you can't accomplish a lot here this summer, though. I would suspect that a lot of this reworking can happen as early as the summer.
Yeah, and I said, first of all, it's hard to imagine, and it's difficult when you think the Canucks last played at the end of April. The hockey season isn't over yet. And so that there's, there's lots of discussions going on between teams that aren't in the Stanley Cup Final. But there are still things that have to happen beyond what the Canucks need to do with the other 31 teams, and there are 2 teams still playing. And that's why, that first week of July has become so important, and free agency on the 13th is becoming so important. Without trying to sit here and hypothesize too much, it's just too early still. And again, we've talked about this a number of times. Our biological clocks, it's the middle of June. The biological clock says we should be talking about this stuff. We should be doing this stuff. Why haven't all these coaches been hired? Why haven't the Canucks done anything?
The draft is next week.
And the draft is the 7th, right? So it's just we went through this in February with trade deadline. People were saying, well, where's the trades? Well, trade deadline wasn't until late March this year. So guys, we have to, it's difficult to sit here and say, this has got to change. This has got to change. I'm sure that Patrik and Jim and their group have defined the core group. And then we're going to move on from there. I mean, the one thing Nick was adamant about that I've heard too is where Brock Boeser fits into all this. And that's, to me, the Boeser one might be the most interesting of them all, because I'm not sure that, I think Canuck fans have seen the best of Boeser in his time in Vancouver, but I'm not sure Rutherford and Allvin saw the best of Boeser. And that's all they can judge on.
I think it's pretty easy to say, of all, if you have to trim off one of the guys, and we're not going to put Miller into this conversation because he's a special circumstance given his contract status and such. But of the other group, I think Boeser's the easiest one to say. I can imagine life without Brock Boeser, and yet moving on from him now would present a trading at a low ebb as opposed to allowing him to rehabilitate the product a little bit.
You're not wrong, but you have to assume that Jim and Patrik may not care about that. And in trying to rebuild the organization, they
just wanting to get
started.
Yeah.
No. Change is a really hard word, Blake. Starting fresh is one. I think that. I think we're going to, 6 months is something that a lot of us have heard. What I would say is that we're going to have a better indication of what Rutherford and Allvin want in October than we do now. And it's, between the end of the regular season which was April, to October is almost 6 months.
Are you led to believe then, John, that the Canucks need a new leadership group in their room? That, what they've got currently as a leadership group just isn't getting the job done when we say words like accountability and we talk about lax COVID protocols and things of that nature?
That's a really good question. I have not heard that. I wouldn't want to sit here and invent something that I've heard that, they need it. I've always heard that Bo Horvat was a great leader, was a good leader. I think that, the question was always halfway through the season, were he and Miller on the same page? The problem becomes for every organization is that players and leaders are either 30% better or 30% worse than they truly are. When you look at the teams that are playing for the Stanley Cup and you look at the parts that the Canucks have, the buzzwords of, down the spine, those are the new buzzwords in the NHL. We have to be strong down the spine. So, Thatcher Demko, as good as it gets, not an issue. Where does Quinn Hughes fit into that? Obviously there's people that there's a tremendous upside with Quinn Hughes. The question becomes, who's your number one center? And how does that number one center? Is it Horvat? Is it Miller? Where's Pettersson fit? Does he become a winger? Is he a center? There's lots of really, really good parts in Vancouver. But you do have to wonder how Rutherford and Allvin are going to manage all of these parts in order to try to improve what they think they have. I think there's a lot more issue on the blue line than there is in the forwards.
Yeah.
When you think about contracts, when you think about what needs to improve. So I think that, there's lots of room for improvement, and I'm sure that Jim and Patrik have an idea of what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. Moving along to the Stanley Cup Final, and what a final it is. I know our buddy Scott Rintoul here was talking to us on Thursday about it, sort of reminiscent of '83, the Islanders and the Oilers, where you saw one dynasty before you and maybe saw the next one rising on up. But in terms of marquee appeal and quality of team, boy, haven't had many like these in recent history.
No.
Avalanche, Lightning.
No, yeah, you could have the argument, well, wouldn't you rather have the New York market? You know what? I would rather have the champions. I mean, this to me is a classic heavyweight fight. This, when you think about, the veteran champion with the upstart, a team that has learned, obviously, this time around, learned how to win through adversity. The Avalanche, up until last year, they were one of those, they certainly know how to disappoint us franchises. But this year they have played at a different level. But to me, when you look at this series in a microcosm, Tampa has Hedman, the Avalanche have Makar. For every Kucherov, there's a McKinnon. The depth of the forwards is impressive on both sides. So really, the biggest key, guys, and I'm not saying something that everybody hasn't said already. Vasilevsky versus Kemper. What do you do? I mean, the Avalanche have not faced a goaltender like Andrei Vasilevsky in these playoffs.
No.
When you think that David Riddick and Connor Ingram, Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen, Husso and Binnington, they have not faced Andrei Vasilevsky. And that, to me, tips the scale in favor of the champions. And I do think we're going to see a three-peat.
It's to me, I'm wondering how much pressure the Avalanche feel in that we call them the sort of the next ones, and they're young enough that they certainly are there, but it's not like McKinnon's 22 anymore. I'm sure McKinnon wants to start winning those Stanley Cups now. I'm just imagining if they have to lose this Stanley Cup final in that clinching moment for a three-peat. I'm sure McKinnon would not want to look at that scene of the other team hoisting the Stanley Cup after finally getting this close. I wonder how much pressure Nathan McKinnon feels right now, because we see it, how much that competitiveness burns inside of him.
Yeah, so much of what I have a ton of respect for that organization, and the guy that to me is the greatest barometer for that team is Gabriel Landeskog. I mean, this guy is I think he's the ultimate leader. First of all, I think he's become a really good two-way forward. He's a 200-foot player, and then has become such a great spokesman and a calming influence and an inspiring influence in that dressing room. To me, he's the barometer, Blake. He's the guy that will be the difference maker. And if this team gets in a funk, it'll be Landeskog that gets them out of the funk. And if this team gets too high, it'll be Landeskog that keeps them grounded. He's so important to all this. The other team has 6 or 7 guys like that right now because they've all been through it. They know the price to pay. Scott's comparison to the 83 Islanders is a fair one. The one thing I would say is the difference between the Oilers of 83 and this Colorado team is that Colorado has received a ton of criticism for a longer period of time than the Oilers did in 82 when they lost in that first round to Los Angeles, and in 83 when they got swept by the Islanders. So from that perspective, the learning curve has been a little longer for the Avalanche. And the other thing is, I think the only way that the Avalanche are truly embarrassed if Tampa wins this in 4 or 5. And that's not going to happen. If you get to a 6th or a 7th game, there's no shame in losing. There's no embarrassment in losing. It's if you get swept, or if you lose if you lose both games at home. That's when it becomes a real issue. And we all know how difficult it is to play in Denver when you're coming from sea level in Tampa to 5,280 feet in Denver. That's going to be a factor for the first game and a half, I think, for Tampa as well.
Wonderful stuff, John. Enjoy the Stanley Cup Final. Appreciate your time. We'll catch up next Monday.
Okay, boys. Talk to you soon.
John Shannon, everybody, the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada and the co-host of the Bob McCown podcast.